Welcome back to the channel, where we dive deep into history's most fascinating mysteries. Today, we're embarking on a journey that will completely shatter everything you think you know about pirates. Look at this image of Captain Jack Sparrow with his flowing silk coat, feathered tricorn hat, and perfectly clean white shirt. Now look at this historically accurate depiction of a real pirate. See the difference? If you're thinking, wait, where's the glamour? Where are the fancy clothes? Then you're about to discover that Hollywood has been lying to you for decades. The truth about pirate fashion isn't just surprising. It's a complete revelation about survival, practicality, and the harsh realities of life on the high seas. These weren't fashion-conscious buccaneers strutting around in designer outfits. They were desperate sailors, former Navy men, and outcasts wearing whatever they could steal, patch together, or salvage from shipwrecks. But here's what's fascinating. Within those constraints, they created a style that was both brutally practical and surprisingly expressive of their rebellious spirit. Over the next hour, we're going to completely reconstruct what a real pirate actually looked like. We'll examine every piece of clothing from head to toe, uncover the practical reasons behind their choices, debunk the biggest myths that movies have perpetuated, and discover how real pirate fashion was infinitely more interesting than any Hollywood costume designer could imagine. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a pirate movie the same way again. Let's start with the foundation of any pirate's wardrobe. The basic clothing that kept them alive and functional in one of the world's most hostile environments. The reality of pirate clothing. Picture this. You standing on the deck of a pirate ship in 1715. The Caribbean sun is beating down mercilessly. Salt spray is constantly soaking everything, and you're expected to climb rigging, haul heavy ropes, and fight for your life at a moment's notice. Your clothes aren't a fashion statement, they're survival equipment. This is the reality that shaped every single piece of clothing a pirate wore. The most important thing to understand about pirate clothing is that it wasn't pirate clothing at all. It was sailor clothing, modified by necessity and circumstance. Pirates were, first and foremost, sailors who had chosen a life of crime. Their clothing reflected this maritime heritage, adapted for the specific challenges of their lawless lifestyle. When we look at historical records, inventories from captured pirate ships, and contemporary accounts from the Golden Age of Piracy, a very different picture emerges from what we see in movies. These men, and the occasional woman, were wearing practical, often patched and repaired clothing that prioritized function over form. But within these practical constraints, they found ways to express their personality, status, and defiance of conventional society. The clothing had to serve multiple masters. It needed to protect from the elements, allow for the physical demands of shipboard life, be easily cleaned, or at least maintainable in an environment with limited fresh water, and when possible, intimidate enemies and project an image of success to potential recruits. It's a complex balancing act that resulted in a distinctive style that was both practical and psychological warfare. The foundation. Shirts and basic garments. Let's begin with the most basic garment, the shirt. In movies, pirates always seem to be wearing pristine white linen shirts, often left romantically open at the chest. The reality was far different and far more practical. Most pirates wore shirts made from whatever fabric they could acquire, often linen or cotton, but frequently hemp, wool, or even canvas when nothing else was available. These shirts were typically loose-fitting and long-sleeved for very specific reasons. The loose fit allowed for maximum mobility when climbing, rigging, or engaging in swordplay. The long sleeves protected arms from rope burns, one of the most common injuries aboard sailing ships, The constant handling of rough hemp rope could literally strip the skin from a sailor's arms, so covering them was essential. The color of these shirts was rarely white. White fabric was expensive, difficult to maintain, and impractical for men who might go weeks without access to fresh water for washing. Instead, pirates typically wore shirts in browns, greys, or what sailors called slop colors, muddy, indeterminate hues that wouldn't show stains. When white shirts appear in historical accounts, they're usually described as once white, or grey with age and salt. The fabric choice was crucial. Linen was preferred when available because it was cooler in hot climates and dried relatively quickly. Cotton was becoming more common during the Golden Age of Piracy, especially as pirates operated increasingly in cotton-growing regions of the Americas. However, many pirates wore shirts made from whatever they could steal or trade for. Canvas shirts, made from the same material as sails, were surprisingly common. They were durable, cheap, and readily available. The construction of these shirts was usually simple. A basic pullover design with minimal decoration. Buttons were expensive and easily lost, so many pirate shirts were held together with ties, simple wooden toggles, or nothing at all. The neck opening was often left quite loose, not for romantic effect, but because tight collars were uncomfortable during physical labor and could be dangerous in a fight. Underneath their shirts, pirates typically wore nothing. Undergarments, as we know them today, simply didn't exist for working-class men of the period. At most, they might wear a thin undershirt in colder climates, but this was unusual. The lack of undergarments wasn't just about availability, it was practical. Fewer layers meant less bulk for movement, less fabric to maintain, and crucially, less chance of harboring parasites and disease. The sleeves of pirate shirts often showed signs of modification. Many pirates rolled up their sleeves and secured them with ties or simple stitching to keep them out of the way during work. Others cut their sleeves shorter, especially in tropical climates. These modifications were always functional, never decorative. One fascinating aspect of pirate shirts was how they reflected the owner's history. A shirt might have been stolen from a captured merchant vessel, taken from a defeated enemy, or traded from another crew member. Each shirt told a story, often literally. Many bore patches, repairs, and modifications that spoke to their owner's adventures and misadventures. The maintenance of these shirts was a constant challenge. Pirates had limited access to fresh water. Soap was a luxury, and washing facilities were minimal. Instead of frequent washing, shirts were often aired out, scraped clean of salt deposits, and patched when they tore. The result was clothing that might have started as one color but evolved into something completely different through exposure to sun, salt, and the general wear of pirate life. When it came to outer garments, pirates wore what sailors everywhere wore: practical jackets and vests. The classic pirate coat of popular imagination, a long, flowing garment with elaborate decorations, was actually quite rare. Most pirates wore short jackets or vests that wouldn't tangle in rigging or flap around during combat. These jackets were typically made from wool or canvas, materials that could stand up to constant wear and provide some protection from the elements. The cut was usually simple: straight lines, minimal tailoring, and plenty of room for movement. Pockets were essential. Pirates needed to carry various tools and personal items, and clothing pockets were often the only storage space available. The color of these outer garments varied widely, but they were typically dark or neutral tones. Black, brown, gray, and dark blue were common. Not because pirates preferred these colors aesthetically, but because they didn't show dirt and blood as readily as lighter colors. A pirate's jacket might need to last for months or even years without replacement, so durability trumped appearance every time. Modifications to jackets were common and usually practical. Pirates might add extra pockets, reinforce areas that saw heavy wear, or alter the cut for better movement. Some jackets showed battle damage, cuts from sword fights, bullet holes, or burns from gunpowder. Rather than discarding damaged clothing, pirates typically repaired what they could and wore their scars as badges of honor. The sleeves of pirate jackets often had specific modifications. Many were cut to allow for easy rolling up when working with ropes or weapons. Others had reinforced areas at the elbows and shoulders, places that saw the most wear during shipboard activities. Some pirates added small loops or ties to their sleeves to secure them when working aloft. Trousers and lower body garments. Moving down to trousers, we encounter another area where Hollywood gets it spectacularly wrong. The tight-fitting leather pants or perfectly tailored breeches you see in movies would have been not just impractical, but potentially deadly for a working pirate. Real pirate trousers were almost universally loose-fitting and made from durable materials like canvas, wool, or heavy cotton. These slops, as they were known to sailors, were designed for maximum mobility and durability. The loose fit served multiple purposes. It allowed for easy movement when climbing, rigging, didn't restrict circulation during long periods of physical activity, and could be easily removed if a pirate fell overboard. Tight clothing could trap a man underwater and lead to drowning. The length of pirate trousers was typically just below the knee or mid-calf. This wasn't a fashion choice, but a practical one. Longer trousers would get caught in rigging, soak up more water in rough seas, and take longer to dry. Shorter trousers meant less fabric to maintain and less weight when wet. Most pirate trousers were held up with rope or simple cloth ties rather than belts. This system was more reliable than buttons or buckles, which could break or corrode in the salt air. The waistband was usually quite loose, allowing the trousers to be quickly adjusted or removed if necessary. The fabric of these trousers tells its own story about pirate life. Canvas trousers, made from the same material as ship's sails, were incredibly popular because they were durable, water-resistant to some degree, and readily available. When sails needed replacement or repair, the old canvas often found new life as clothing. Wool trousers were preferred in colder climates or during winter months, but they were heavier when wet and took longer to dry. Color-wise, pirate trousers followed the same practical philosophy as their shirts. Dark, neutral tones that wouldn't show stains or wear. Brown, gray, and dark blue were common, with occasional black or dark green. These colors had the added advantage of being achieved with relatively inexpensive dyes, or could be maintained with improvised staining materials like tar or soot. The pockets in pirate trousers were crucial features. Pirates needed to carry various tools and personal items, and clothing pockets were often their only storage option. However, deep pockets could be dangerous when climbing or fighting. So many pirates preferred shallow pockets or external pouches tied to their waistbands. Repairs and modifications to trousers were constant necessities. Pirates regularly patched holes, reinforced worn areas, and adjusted the fit as needed. These repairs were typically done with whatever materials were available. Patches might be made from sailcloth, other clothing, or even leather. The result was clothing that often looked more like patchwork than original garments. One particularly interesting aspect of pirate trousers was how they reflected the international nature of pirate crews. A single ship might have crew members from England, France, Spain, Africa, and the Caribbean, each bringing their own clothing traditions. This mixing of styles created a unique hybrid fashion that combined practical elements from multiple maritime cultures. For undergarments, The situation was even simpler. Most pirates wore nothing under their trousers. Underwear as we know it didn't exist for working-class men of the period, and the additional layer would have been impractical for pirate life. At most, they might wear simple linen drawers in very cold weather, but this was unusual. The relationship between pirates and their trousers was often quite personal. Unlike shirts, which might be changed or swapped regularly, a good pair of trousers could last for months or even years with proper care. Pirates developed techniques for maintaining their trousers, including regular inspection for weak spots, preventive patching, and careful drying to prevent rot and mildew. Headwear function over fashion. Perhaps no single piece of pirate clothing has been more misrepresented than their headwear. The elaborate tricorn hats with massive feathers that we see in movies were indeed worn by some pirates, but they were far from universal and served very different purposes than cinematic portrayals suggest. The most common head covering for pirates was actually the simple bandana or kerchief. This humble piece of cloth served multiple crucial functions that made it indispensable for life at sea. First and foremost, it kept hair out of the face and eyes during physical work, a necessity when your life might depend on your ability to quickly climb rigging or engage in combat. The bandana also absorbed sweat, preventing it from running into the eyes and blinding a pirate at a critical moment. But the bandana's functions went far beyond basic practicality. It provided protection from the brutal tropical sun that could cause severe burns and heatstroke. Many pirates worked shirtless in hot weather, but few worked bareheaded. The risk of sun exposure was simply too great. The bandana also offered some protection from salt spray, which could dry and crack exposed skin over time. The way a pirate tied his bandana could convey information about his status, origin, or even his mood. Different knots and styles were associated with different nationalities or ship traditions. Some pirates tied their bandanas at the back, others at the side, and still others wore them low over their foreheads. These variations weren't random. They were part of the complex social codes that governed pirate society. The material of bandanas varied widely. Cotton was preferred when available because it was absorbent and comfortable against the skin. Silk bandanas, when pirates could acquire them through theft or trade, were prized for their softness and the way they stayed in place without sliding. However, most pirates made do with whatever cloth they could find. Cut-up clothing, pieces of sailcloth, or fabric taken from captured ships. Colors and patterns of bandanas were often the most colorful aspect of a pirate's wardrobe. While their clothing was typically neutral or dark, bandanas might be red, blue, yellow, or even patterned. Red was particularly popular, not just for its bold appearance, but because it was one of the most common dye colors and didn't show bloodstains as readily as lighter colors. When it comes to hats, the reality was much more diverse than movies suggest. The famous tricorn hat was indeed worn by some pirates, but it was typically reserved for captains or officers, and even then, it was often a captured item rather than something purchased specifically for pirate use. These hats were status symbols, taken from defeated naval officers or wealthy merchants, and they served as much to intimidate enemies as to protect from the elements. More common were simple wide-brimmed hats made from felt, straw, or canvas. These provided excellent protection from sun and rain, while being much more practical for shipboard life. A wide brim could shield not just the face, but also the neck and shoulders from sun exposure. These hats were often shapeless and battered from constant wear, but they were infinitely more useful than the elaborate headwear depicted in films. Some pirates wore knit caps, especially in colder climates or during night watches. These caps, often called Monmouth caps after their place of origin, were warm, stayed on in high winds, and could be easily washed or replaced. They were particularly popular among former Navy sailors who were accustomed to this type of headwear. The decoration of pirate hats, when it occurred, was usually minimal and practical. A feather in a hat wasn't just for show. It could indicate rank, commemorate a successful raid, or serve as a simple way to personalize an otherwise utilitarian garment. However, the massive ostrich plumes seen in movies were extremely rare and impractical for shipboard life. Hair management was a significant concern for pirates, and their headwear choices reflected this. Long hair was common among sailors of the period, but it could be dangerous if it got caught in rigging or blocked vision during combat. Pirates developed various ways to manage their hair, from braiding it back to tying it with strips of cloth. Some pirates wore their hair in what was called a queue, a long braid or ponytail that could be tucked into their shirt or wrapped around their neck. The relationship between pirates and their headwear was often deeply personal. A hat or bandana might be one of the few possessions a pirate owned outright, not shared with the crew or subject to the democratic decision-making that governed many aspects of pirate life. As such, these items often took on almost talismanic significance, believed to bring luck or protection. Weather played a huge role in headwear choices. In tropical climates, protection from the sun was paramount, leading to wide-brimmed hats or multiple layers of bandanas. In colder regions or during storms, warmth became the priority, leading to knit caps or layered head coverings. The ability to quickly adapt headwear to changing conditions was a survival skill that every successful pirate mastered. Footwear, the foundation of survival. If you want to understand the harsh realities of pirate life, look at their feet. The romantic image of pirates in polished leather boots is not just wrong, it's almost absurdly wrong. Real pirate footwear tells a story of constant adaptation, creative problem-solving, and the brutal economics of life outside the law. The most common footwear for pirates was actually no footwear at all. Many pirates went barefoot most of the time, especially in warm climates or when working aloft in the rigging. Bare feet provided better grip on wet wood and rope, allowed for more precise movement when climbing, and eliminated the risk of heavy boots dragging a man underwater if he fell overboard. But going barefoot wasn't just about practicality. It was often about necessity. Good boots were expensive, difficult to maintain in the salt air, and hard to replace in the middle of the ocean. Many pirates simply couldn't afford decent footwear, or, if they had it, they saved it for special occasions like raids or going ashore. When pirates did wear shoes, they were typically simple, sturdy affairs. Canvas shoes were popular because they dried quickly and were relatively inexpensive. These were often homemade or improvised from sailcloth and rope. The construction was basic but effective. A canvas upper sewn to a simple sole, often made from rope or wood. Leather boots, when available, were prized possessions. However, these weren't the tall, polished cavalry boots of popular imagination. Real pirate boots were usually short, coming up only to the ankle or mid-calf. They were made from thick, rough leather that could withstand constant exposure to salt water and rough use. The leather was typically left unpolished, not just because polish was unavailable, but because rough leather provided better grip on wet surfaces. The soles of pirate footwear were designed for specific functions. Rope soles were common because they provided excellent grip on wet wood and could be easily repaired or replaced. Some pirates used wooden soles, carved from driftwood or pieces of the ship itself. These were durable and provided good protection from sharp objects on deck, but they were noisy and could be slippery when wet. Boot maintenance was a constant concern. Salt water could crack and rot leather, while the constant moisture of shipboard life encouraged mold and decay. Pirates developed various techniques for preserving their footwear, including regular treatment with tar, oil, or animal fat. These treatments made the boots waterproof, but also gave them a dark, often black appearance that contributed to the pirate's intimidating image. The fit of pirate footwear was typically loose. Tight-fitting boots could restrict circulation during long periods of standing or walking, and they were difficult to remove quickly if needed. Loose boots could be easily kicked off if a pirate fell overboard, and they accommodated the swelling that often occurred during long periods of standing on hard deck surfaces. Some pirates developed ingenious solutions for foot protection. Cloth wrappings, similar to puttees, could protect the lower leg while still allowing for barefoot work. Leather strips or rope could be wrapped around the feet to provide protection while maintaining grip and flexibility. These improvised solutions often worked better than traditional footwear for the specific demands of pirate life. The economic aspect of footwear in pirate society was significant. Good boots were valuable enough to be mentioned specifically in wills and shared among crew members. When a pirate died, his boots were often among the first items claimed by surviving crew members. This wasn't callousness. It was practical necessity in a world where good footwear could mean the difference between life and death. Climate played a huge role in footwear choices. In the Caribbean, many pirates went barefoot or wore minimal foot protection. In colder regions like the North Atlantic, proper boots became essential for survival. This meant that successful pirate crews often maintained stores of footwear for different climates and conditions. The complexity of pirate outerwear. The outer garments worn by pirates represent perhaps the most complex aspect of their wardrobe, where practicality, status, and psychological warfare intersected in fascinating ways. These weren't just clothes, they were armor, advertisement, and survival gear all rolled into one. The pirate coat, as depicted in popular culture, is one of the most misunderstood garments in history. The long, flowing coats, worn by characters like Captain Jack Sparrow, would have been not just impractical but potentially fatal in the real world of piracy. Real pirate coats were typically much shorter, ending somewhere between the waist and mid-thigh, and were designed for mobility rather than dramatic effect. These coats served multiple functions beyond basic protection from the elements. They provided pockets for carrying essential tools and weapons, offered some protection during sword fights, and could be quickly removed if they became entangled or if the wearer fell overboard. The shorter length ensured that the coat wouldn't interfere with the wearer's legs during combat or while working on deck. The materials used for pirate coats varied enormously based on availability and the crew's recent successes. Wool was preferred for its durability and water resistance, but it was heavy when wet and slow to dry. Canvas coats were common, especially among poorer pirates or those operating in warmer climates. These were often made from repurposed sailcloth and were extremely durable, though not particularly comfortable. Leather coats, while not as common as popular culture suggests, were highly prized when available. They provided excellent protection from both weather and weapons, were reasonably water-resistant, and projected an intimidating appearance. However, leather was expensive, difficult to maintain in salt air, and could become stiff and uncomfortable in varying weather conditions. The cut and construction of pirate coats reflected their hybrid nature as both working garments and status symbols. The basic design was usually simple: a front opening with simple fastenings, minimal decoration, and a practical collar that could be turned up for weather protection. However, Successful pirates might modify their coats to project wealth and success, adding captured buttons, decorative elements, or better quality fabric patches. Color played an important role in pirate outerwear, but not in the way you might expect. While dark colors were practical for hiding stains and wear, some pirates deliberately chose bright or unusual colors for psychological effect. A bright red coat could be seen from a distance and helped establish a pirate's reputation. Captains, in particular, might wear distinctive colors to make themselves easily identifiable to their crew during battle. The pockets in pirate coats were engineering marvels of their time. These weren't simple pouches, but carefully designed storage systems. A typical pirate coat might have 6 or more pockets of various sizes, each designed for specific items. Large pockets held pistols or cutlasses, medium pockets carried tools or personal items, and small pockets held coins, shot, or gunpowder. Weather adaptation was crucial for pirate outerwear. In tropical climates, coats were often worn open or not at all during the day, but they were essential during tropical storms or cooler nights. In northern waters, layering became important, with pirates wearing multiple garments that could be added or removed as conditions changed. The lifespan of a pirate coat was typically measured in months rather than years. The constant exposure to salt air, sun, and physical wear took a heavy toll on even the most durable garments. Pirates became expert at repairs, using everything from sailcloth patches to leather reinforcements to extend the life of their clothing. Vests and waistcoats were also common among pirates, often worn instead of full coats in warmer weather or during heavy work. These provided the pocket space and some protection of a coat, while allowing for maximum arm movement. They were typically made from the same materials as coats, but were easier to construct and repair. The fastening systems of pirate outerwear were usually simple and robust. Buttons, when available, were typically made from bone, wood, or horn rather than metal, which could corrode in salt air. Many pirates preferred tie closures or simple wooden toggles that could be operated even with wet or cold hands. Belts, sashes, and waist accessories. The waist area of a pirate's outfit was perhaps the most functionally important and personally expressive part of their entire wardrobe. This is where practicality met personality, where essential tools met personal treasures, and where the line between clothing and equipment became completely blurred. The foundation of any pirate's waist setup was the belt, but this wasn't the simple leather strap we might imagine today. Pirate belts were complex systems designed to carry the tools and weapons necessary for survival and success. A typical pirate belt was wide, often 3 to 4 inches, and made from the strongest leather available. This width was necessary to distribute the weight of the various items. A pirate needed to carry and to provide a stable platform for quick weapon access. These belts weren't just functional. They were often among the most valuable items a pirate owned. A good leather belt could last for years with proper care, and many pirates invested significant portions of their share of loot in acquiring or improving their belt systems. The leather was usually thick cowhide, sometimes reinforced with metal studs or additional leather layers in high-stress areas. The buckle of a pirate belt, when present, was typically simple and robust. Elaborate buckles were impractical and could catch on rigging or clothing during combat. Most pirates preferred simple metal buckles or even rope and toggle systems that were less likely to fail at critical moments. The buckle placement was usually slightly off-center to allow for comfortable positioning of weapons and tools. But many pirates supplemented or replaced belts entirely with sashes, long pieces of cloth wrapped around the waist multiple times. These sashes served many of the same functions as belts, but offered additional advantages. They could be quickly unwrapped and used as bandages, tourniquets, or rope in emergencies. They were also much easier to adjust for changes in weight or when wearing different layers of clothing. Sashes were typically made from whatever strong cloth was available. Silk sashes, when pirates could acquire them, were prized for their strength and flexibility. However, most sashes were made from canvas, heavy cotton, or wool. The color of a sash could be personally significant. Some pirates chose colors that represented their nationality, their ship, or simply their personal preference. The items carried on a pirate's belt or sash system were carefully chosen for maximum utility. Every pirate carried at least one knife, usually a sturdy working blade, rather than an ornate weapon. This knife served countless functions: cutting rope, preparing food, personal defense, and general utility work. The knife was typically carried in a simple leather sheath attached directly to the belt. Pistols, when available, were also carried on the belt system. However, these weren't the elaborate flintlock pistols of movie fame. Real pirate pistols were simple, reliable weapons designed for close-range combat. They were often carried in simple leather holsters or simply tucked into the sash. Many pirates carried multiple pistols because the single-shot nature of the weapons meant having backups was essential. Small pouches and bags were crucial components of the pirate belt system. These carried everything from coins and precious stones to gunpowder and shot. The pouches were usually made from leather or heavy cloth and were designed to be waterproof or at least water-resistant. Many featured simple but effective closure systems that could be operated quickly even in combat situations. Personal items carried on the belt might include a pipe and tobacco pouch, a small eating knife, a marlin spike for rope work, or various tools specific to the pirate's role on the ship. Carpenters carried different tools than gunners, and each pirate's belt setup reflected his specific skills and responsibilities. The arrangement of items on a pirate's belt was highly personal and carefully considered. Weapons were positioned for quick access with the dominant hand, while tools were arranged based on frequency of use. Many pirates practiced drawing weapons and tools from their belts until the movements became automatic. In combat, fumbling for a weapon could be fatal. Money and valuables presented special challenges for pirate belt systems. Coins were heavy and could make noise during stealth operations, but they were also too valuable to leave unguarded. Many pirates developed ingenious hiding places within their belt systems: secret pockets, false bottoms in pouches, or items sewn into the belt itself. The maintenance of belt systems was a constant concern. Leather needed regular treatment to prevent cracking and rot. Metal components required protection from rust, and cloth elements needed to be checked for wear and tear. Pirates often spent their leisure time maintaining and improving their belt systems, as their lives literally depended on the reliability of these essential tools. Accessories that defined identity beyond the basic necessities of clothing and tool carrying, pirates expressed their individuality and advertised their success through a variety of accessories that served both practical and psychological purposes. These accessories tell us more about pirate society, values, and personal expression than any other aspect of their appearance. Earrings are perhaps the most iconic pirate accessory, and unlike many pirate stereotypes, this one has substantial historical basis. However, the reasons pirates wore earrings were far more complex and practical than simply following fashion trends. The most persistent historical explanation is that gold earrings were believed by sailors to improve eyesight. While this belief had no medical basis, It was widespread among maritime communities and influenced many pirates' decision to pierce their ears. Another practical reason for earrings was economic. A gold earring represented a form of portable wealth that couldn't be easily stolen or lost. Unlike coins that could fall from pockets or be taken during sleep, earrings stayed with their owner. There was also a tradition that the gold in a sailor's earring would pay for his burial if his body washed ashore, ensuring he wouldn't end up in a pauper's grave. The types of earrings worn by pirates varied considerably. Simple gold hoops were most common, but some pirates wore more elaborate pieces stolen from wealthy passengers or purchased during visits to port cities. Pearl earrings were particularly prized, both for their beauty and their value. However, the massive, elaborate earrings often depicted in movies were rare. They were impractical for active shipboard life and could be easily torn out during combat. Jewelry beyond earrings was also common among successful pirates. Rings served similar functions to earrings. They were portable wealth, difficult to steal, and served as symbols of success. However, pirates were careful about wearing too many rings, as they could interfere with rope work and weapon handling. Most pirates wore only 1 or 2 rings, typically on fingers that wouldn't interfere with their work. Necklaces and chains presented interesting challenges for pirates. While they could display wealth and status, they were also potential liabilities in combat. An enemy could grab a chain and use it against its wearer. As a result, most pirate necklaces were either very short or designed to break away easily if grabbed. Some pirates wore their most valuable necklaces under their shirts, hidden from view but still accessible if needed, for trade or bribery. The sources of pirate jewelry tell fascinating stories about their activities and travels. A pirate might wear a Spanish gold ring taken from a captured galleon, a pearl necklace stolen from a wealthy plantation owner's wife, and earrings traded from a friendly merchant in Port Royal. Each piece represented not just wealth but a story, an adventure, or a successful raid. Watches and timepieces were extremely rare but highly prized accessories among pirates. These weren't worn for fashion, but for their practical value in navigation and coordinating activities. A pirate captain with a reliable timepiece had a significant advantage in planning raids and navigating. These items were so valuable that they were often mentioned specifically in crew agreements and wills. Tobacco accessories were nearly universal among pirates. Smoking was extremely common, and the accessories associated with it became important parts of a pirate's personal kit. Pipe cases, tobacco pouches, and tinderboxes were often carried on the belt or in pockets. These items were typically simple and functional, though successful pirates might invest in more elaborate pieces. Personal grooming accessories were more common among pirates than popular culture suggests. Combs, often made from bone or wood, were practical necessities for managing hair and controlling parasites. Small mirrors, when available, served practical purposes for signaling and fire starting, as well as personal grooming. These items were typically small and sturdy, designed to withstand the rigors of shipboard life. The decoration and personalization of accessories was one of the primary ways pirates expressed their individuality. In a society where most possessions were communal and personal space was minimal, accessories became crucial forms of self-expression. Pirates might carve their initials into pipe cases, decorate their belt buckles, or add personal touches to their jewelry. Religious accessories were also common, despite the lawless nature of pirate life. Many pirates wore crosses, religious medals, or other spiritual items. These served both personal, spiritual needs and practical purposes. Religious items were often respected, even by enemies, and might provide protection during capture or injury. The trading and gifting of accessories was an important social function in pirate society. Successful pirates often rewarded loyal crew members with jewelry or other accessories. These gifts weren't just generous gestures, they were investments in crew loyalty and morale. A pirate who shared his wealth was more likely to maintain a loyal crew. Weapons as fashion statements in the world of piracy. The line between clothing and weaponry was virtually non-existent. Weapons were unjust tools of the trade. They were essential accessories that defined a pirate's identity, projected his reputation, and quite literally kept him alive. The way a pirate wore and displayed his weapons was as important as the weapons themselves. The cutlass is undoubtedly the weapon most associated with pirates, and for good reason. This short, curved sword was perfectly adapted to the close-quarters combat common in ship-to-ship fighting. But the cutlass was unchosen just for its effectiveness in battle. It was also the perfect weapon for the spatial constraints of shipboard life. A long sword would be unwieldy below decks or when climbing, rigging, but a cutlass could be drawn and used effectively in even the most cramped conditions. The way pirates wore their cutlasses was carefully considered. Most hung their cutlass from their left side, allowing for a crossbody draw with the right hand. This position kept the weapon out of the way during normal activities, while ensuring it could be quickly accessed when needed. The scabbard was typically simple leather or canvas, prioritizing durability and weather resistance over decoration. However, the cutlass served functions beyond combat. Its heavy blade made it useful for cutting rope, chopping food, and various other shipboard tasks. Many pirates used their cutlass as a general-purpose tool, and the wear patterns on historical examples show evidence of this varied use. Pistols represented a more complex relationship between practicality and status. During the Golden Age of Piracy, firearms were expensive, unreliable, and required constant maintenance in the corrosive salt air environment. Yet, many pirates carried multiple pistols, not just for their effectiveness in combat, but for the psychological impact they created. A pirate bristling with weapons was a walking advertisement of his dangerousness and success. The typical pirate pistol was a simple flintlock design, much more basic than the ornate weapons often shown in films. These were working weapons, designed for reliability rather than beauty. The wooden stocks were often plain and undecorated, and the metal components were kept simple to reduce the chance of malfunction. However, successful pirates might invest in higher quality weapons or have their pistols modified by ships, carpenters, or metalworkers. The carrying of multiple pistols was a practical necessity, due to the single-shot nature of the weapons. Reloading a flintlock pistol took time and required dry powder, both of which were often unavailable during combat. By carrying 3 or 4 pistols, a pirate could maintain firepower throughout a fight. These were typically carried in a bandolier across the chest or tucked into the sash around the waist. Knives represented perhaps the most personal and varied category of pirate weapons. Every pirate carried at least one knife, and many carried several for different purposes. The primary fighting knife was usually a simple, sturdy blade with a practical handle. But pirates also carried specialized knives, a small eating knife, a rope-cutting knife, and perhaps a throwing knife, if they had the skill to use one effectively. The placement and display of knives was both practical and psychological. A knife worn prominently on the belt served as a warning to potential enemies, while remaining easily accessible to its owner. Some pirates wore knives in their boots, providing a hidden backup weapon that could be crucial in close combat. The handles of these knives were typically wrapped in cord or leather for better grip, especially when wet. Boarding axes were another common weapon that doubled as a tool. These weren't the massive battle axes of medieval warfare, but smaller, more practical weapons designed for the specific needs of ship-to-ship combat. They could cut through rope and rigging, break down doors, and serve as effective close combat weapons. The boarding axe was typically carried on the back or side, secured with leather straps that allowed for quick release. The personalization of weapons was an important aspect of pirate culture. Many pirates carved their initials or personal symbols into their weapon handles, both as identification and as a form of personal expression. Some wrapped their weapon handles with colored cord or leather, creating distinctive patterns that made their weapons instantly recognizable. Weapon maintenance was a constant concern for pirates. Salt air corroded metal rapidly, wooden handles could rot or crack, and the constant moisture of shipboard life threatened all materials. Pirates developed various techniques for protecting their weapons, including regular cleaning with oil, wrapping in oiled cloth, and storing in sealed containers when possible. The acquisition of weapons was often one of the first priorities for new pirates. A man without weapons was essentially helpless in pirate society, unable to contribute to raids or defend himself from enemies or even fellow crew members. As a result, weapons were often among the first items distributed to new crew members, and they were frequently mentioned in crew agreements and ship's articles. The maritime environment's impact on clothing. Understanding pirate fashion requires understanding the brutal environment that shaped every clothing choice. The sea was not just their workplace, it was a hostile environment that destroyed clothing, corroded metal, rotted fabric, and challenged every aspect of personal maintenance. The clothing that survived and thrived in this environment tells us everything about pirate priorities and ingenuity. Salt was perhaps the greatest enemy of pirate clothing. Sea spray contained salt that, when it dried, left crystalline deposits that could cut fabric like tiny knives. These salt crystals worked their way into every fiber, making clothing stiff, uncomfortable, and prone to tearing. Pirates developed various techniques for dealing with salt damage, including regular brushing to remove deposits and occasional freshwater rinses when available. The constant moisture of shipboard life created unique challenges for clothing maintenance. In an environment where everything was always slightly damp, preventing mold and mildew required constant vigilance. Pirates learned to air out their clothing whenever possible, taking advantage of dry weather and wind to prevent their garments from rotting away. This is why loose-fitting, quick-drying fabrics were so highly prized. Temperature extremes were another constant challenge. A pirate ship might sail from the frigid North Atlantic to the sweltering Caribbean in a single voyage, requiring clothing that could adapt to vastly different conditions. This led to the development of layering systems that could be adjusted as needed. A pirate might wear a thin shirt in the tropics, but add a vest, jacket, and possibly even a cloak when sailing in northern waters. The wind on a ship's deck was a force that shaped clothing choices in ways that landlubbers rarely consider. Loose clothing could catch the wind and interfere with work or even pose safety hazards. Pirates learned to secure loose ends with ties or tuck clothing into belts and boots. At the same time, clothing needed to be loose enough to allow for the constant movement required by shipboard life. Sun exposure was a serious concern, especially for fair-skinned pirates operating in tropical waters. The reflection of sunlight off water doubled the sun's intensity, and there was little shade on most ship decks. This led to the popularity of wide-brimmed hats, long sleeves, and high collars that could protect exposed skin. Pirates learned to cover up, not for modesty but for survival. Rain presented its own challenges. Tropical downpours could soak clothing completely in minutes, While the cold rains of northern waters could lead to hypothermia if pirates couldn't get dry, this led to the development of simple rain protection: oiled canvas cloaks, wide-brimmed hats, and clothing that shed water rather than absorbing it. The rolling motion of a ship at sea affected how clothing fit and functioned. Tight clothing could restrict movement when a pirate needed to maintain balance on a rolling deck, while overly loose clothing could become entangled or interfere with quick movement. Pirates developed an instinct for clothing that provided the right balance of freedom and security. Storage space on pirate ships was extremely limited, which profoundly affected clothing choices. Pirates typically owned only one or two complete outfits, with perhaps a few spare pieces. This meant that every garment needed to be versatile, durable, and icily maintained. The concept of specialized clothing for different activities was largely foreign to pirate life. The same outfit needed to work for combat, heavy labor, and socializing in port. The lack of cleaning facilities meant that pirate clothing needed to be either self-maintaining or icily cleaned with seawater. Fabrics that showed every stain were impractical, while materials that could be scrubbed with salt water and still maintain their integrity were highly valued. This practical constraint shaped color choices, fabric preferences, and even construction techniques. Regional variations and cultural influences. Piracy was a global phenomenon, and pirates operated from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. From the Mediterranean to the coast of Madagascar, this geographic diversity created fascinating regional variations in pirate fashion. As local climates, available materials, and cultural influences shaped how pirates dressed in different parts of the world. Caribbean pirates, operating in the heart of the tropical trade routes, developed clothing strategies specifically adapted to hot, humid conditions and sudden, violent storms. Their clothing tended to be lighter in weight and color, made from fabrics that dried quickly and provided protection from intense sun. Canvas and light cotton were preferred materials, often in earth tones that wouldn't show the constant exposure to tropical elements. The availability of captured Spanish and French goods in the Caribbean meant that successful pirates in this region often had access to higher quality fabrics and more elaborate accessories than their counterparts elsewhere. Spanish silk, French lace, and fine leather goods taken from treasure ships allowed successful Caribbean pirates to dress in a style that mixed practical seamanship with captured luxury. In contrast, pirates operating in the colder waters of the North Atlantic developed very different clothing strategies. Here, warmth was often more important than comfort, leading to heavier fabrics, multiple layers, and more substantial outerwear. Wool became the fabric of choice, often in darker colors that provided better heat absorption and didn't show the grime of extended wear. Mediterranean pirates, many of whom were Muslim corsairs operating from North African ports, brought different cultural traditions to pirate fashion. These pirates often wore turbans instead of European-style hats, loose-fitting robes that provided excellent protection from sun and sand, and footwear adapted to both shipboard life and desert conditions when operating from land bases. The influence of African clothing traditions was significant in pirate fashion, though it's often overlooked in popular accounts. Many pirates were escaped slaves or free Africans who brought their own clothing traditions to pirate society. African textile techniques, color preferences, and garment construction methods influenced pirate clothing throughout the Caribbean and along the African coast. Asian pirates, particularly those operating in the South China Sea and Indian Ocean, developed clothing styles that reflected the specific challenges of monsoon seasons and tropical warfare. Their clothing often featured more sophisticated approaches to moisture management, with fabrics and construction techniques that had been developed over centuries for maritime use in challenging climates. The materials available in different regions profoundly shaped local pirate fashion. Caribbean pirates had access to cotton, tropical hardwoods for buttons and accessories, and exotic dyes that created unique color palettes. Mediterranean pirates could acquire fine wools, silks from the Middle East, and leather goods from across Europe and North Africa. Each region's pirates developed distinctive looks based on what they could steal, trade for, or manufacture locally. Cultural exchange was constant in pirate society. A ship's crew might include men from a dozen different countries and cultural backgrounds, each bringing their own clothing, traditions, and practical knowledge. This mixing created hybrid styles that combined the best elements of different maritime cultures. A single pirate might wear a Spanish hat, an English shirt, African-style leg wrappings, and Turkish slippers, creating a unique ensemble that reflected his diverse experiences. The role of local craftsmen and suppliers was also important in shaping regional pirate fashion. Pirates needed to maintain and replace their clothing, and they often relied on local tailors, cobblers, and craftsmen in the ports they frequented. These craftsmen, in turn, influenced pirate fashion by suggesting modifications, introducing new techniques, or simply working with the materials they had available. Trade relationships with local populations created another layer of cultural influence. Pirates often traded with indigenous peoples, acquiring clothing items and accessories that were well adapted to local conditions. Native American moccasins, for example, became popular among some pirate crews operating along the North American coast, because they were better suited to certain types of terrain than European footwear. The economics of pirate clothing, the economic realities of pirate life, profoundly shaped every aspect of their fashion choices. Pirates operated outside the normal economic systems of their time, which created unique challenges and opportunities when it came to acquiring and maintaining clothing. Understanding these economic pressures reveals why pirate fashion developed its distinctive characteristics. Acquisition of clothing was fundamentally different for pirates than for other members of society. While most people bought their clothes from tailors or made them at home, pirates primarily acquired clothing through theft, capture, or trade. This created a wardrobe that was essentially random in origin, but carefully curated for practicality and value. When pirates captured a ship, clothing was often among the most immediately useful loot. Unlike gold or silver, which had to be converted into usable currency, good clothing could be worn immediately. However, not all captured clothing was suitable for pirate life. Elaborate court dress or delicate fabrics were often traded away for more practical items, while sturdy, well-made garments were kept and adapted as needed. The value system for pirate clothing was entirely practical. A simple but well-made canvas jacket was worth more to a working pirate than an elaborate silk coat that would be destroyed in a single storm. This created a unique marketplace where utility trumped luxury, and items were valued based on their survival potential rather than their original cost. Tailoring services were available in many pirate ports, but they operated under different constraints than normal tailoring. Pirate tailors needed to work quickly, use whatever materials were available, and create garments that could withstand extreme abuse. They often specialized in repairs and modifications rather than creating new garments from scratch. The sharing of clothing within pirate crews was common and often formalized. Many ships' articles included provisions for sharing captured clothing, ensuring that all crew members had adequate protection from the elements. This communal approach to clothing meant that individual style was often subordinated to crew needs. Though successful pirates could usually claim the best items for themselves, repair and maintenance of clothing was a constant economic pressure. Thread, needles, and patches all had to be acquired and conserved. Many pirates became skilled at basic tailoring out of necessity, learning to patch holes, replace buttons, and modify fit. Ships often carried a slop chest, a store of basic clothing and materials that crew members could purchase against their share of future loot. The investment in quality clothing was often a mark of a successful pirate. A pirate who could afford well-made boots, a good coat, or quality accessories was advertising his success to potential crew members and intimidating enemies. This created pressure for successful pirates to dress the part, investing their loot in clothing that projected the right image. Currency was often a problem for pirates when trying to purchase clothing. Their wealth was usually in the form of stolen goods, foreign coins, or precious metals that weren't easily converted to local currency. This meant that barter and trade were often more practical than cash purchases. A pirate might trade stolen silverware for a good pair of boots or exchange captured jewelry for practical clothing. The seasonality of pirate operations affected clothing economics. Pirates often needed different clothing for different seasons or regions. But storage space was limited, and the unpredictable nature of their lifestyle made it difficult to plan ahead. This led to strategies like layering systems that could adapt to different conditions, or partnerships with suppliers in different ports who could provide appropriate clothing when needed. Social hierarchy and dress codes. Pirate society, despite its reputation for equality and democracy, had distinct social hierarchies that were clearly reflected in clothing choices. The way a pirate dressed communicated his rank, success, wealth, and role within the crew to everyone who saw him. These visual cues were essential in a society where first impressions could determine whether you were respected, robbed, or recruited. Ship captains occupied the top of the pirate hierarchy, and their clothing reflected this status. A successful pirate captain needed to project authority, wealth, and competence to maintain control over his crew and intimidate enemies. This meant that captain's clothing was typically the finest available, often featuring captured luxury items that had been modified for practical use. Captain's coats were usually the most elaborate garments on the ship. These might be captured naval uniforms that had been modified, fine merchant coats taken as loot, or custom-made garments created by skilled tailors in pirate ports. The key was that they needed to look impressive while still being functional for shipboard life. Many captains' coats featured gold or silver buttons, not just for decoration but as a form of portable wealth. The famous tricorn hat was most commonly worn by captains and officers. These hats were expensive and impractical for regular crew members, but they served important functions for leadership. The height and distinctive shape made the captain easily identifiable during battle, while the quality, materials, and construction projected wealth and success. Feathers, when present, were usually simple ostrich or other plumes, rather than the elaborate decorations shown in movies. Quartermaster's clothing occupied a middle ground between captain's finery and crew practicality. As the second-in-command and often the elected representative of the crew, quartermasters needed to project authority while maintaining credibility with ordinary sailors. Their clothing was typically well-made and maintained, but not ostentatious. Regular crew members wore the most practical clothing, prioritizing function over appearance. However, even among common pirates, there were subtle distinctions based on role and experience. Experienced sailors often had better maintained clothing and more accessories than newcomers. Skilled specialists like carpenters, surgeons, or navigators might have clothing adapted to their specific roles. The distribution of captured clothing followed strict protocols on most pirate ships. The captain typically had first choice of any captured garments, followed by officers and then crew members based on their shares of the loot. However, this system was balanced by practical considerations. If a crew member's clothing was dangerously worn, he might receive priority for replacement garments, regardless of his rank. Dress codes, while not formally written, were enforced through social pressure. A pirate who dressed above his station might face mockery, or even violence from his crewmates, while one who failed to maintain minimal standards might be seen as a liability to the crew's reputation. These unwritten rules helped maintain order and hierarchy in an otherwise lawless society. The concept of Sunday best existed even among pirates. Many crews maintained better clothing for special occasions, going ashore, meeting with other captains, or conducting formal business. This good clothing was carefully preserved and only worn when necessary, as replacing it might be impossible. New crew members faced particular challenges with regard to clothing. Men who joined pirate crews often arrived with only the clothes on their backs. Having fled their previous lives, suddenly, the crew's willingness to share clothing with newcomers was often a test of their acceptance and a measure of the crew's prosperity and generosity. The role of captured finery. One of the most fascinating aspects of pirate fashion was how captured luxury items were incorporated into otherwise practical wardrobes. When pirates captured merchant ships or raided coastal settlements, they often acquired clothing and accessories that were far more elaborate than anything they could normally afford. The ways they adapted, modified, and displayed these items reveals much about pirate values and creativity. Silk garments presented particular challenges for pirates. While silk was beautiful and valuable, it was also delicate and completely unsuited to the harsh realities of shipboard life. Pirates developed various strategies for dealing with captured silk clothing. Some items were immediately traded for more practical goods, while others were carefully preserved for special occasions or eventual sale. However, some pirates found ways to incorporate silk into their working wardrobes. Silk bandanas and sashes were particularly prized because they were comfortable against the skin and could withstand more abuse than silk garments. Silk linings might be added to practical coats, providing comfort without sacrificing durability. Captured naval uniforms presented both opportunities and challenges. These garments were typically well made and designed for maritime use, making them excellent additions to a pirate wardrobe. However, wearing a recognizable naval uniform could be dangerous if it led to being mistaken for a deserter, or if it attracted unwanted attention from naval patrols. Pirates often solved this problem by modifying captured uniforms beyond recognition. They might remove or alter distinctive elements like gold braid, regimental buttons, or specific color patterns while retaining the quality construction and practical features. A captured naval coat might be turned inside out, dyed a different color, or have its decorative elements removed and replaced with more practical features. Ecclesiastical garments, captured during raids on churches or wealthy clergy, posed interesting problems for pirates. While many pirates had little respect for religious authority, they often recognized the quality of clerical clothing. Fine wool Cossacks might be modified into practical coats, while silk vestments could be repurposed as sashes or bandanas. Women's clothing, captured during raids on passenger ships or coastal settlements, required creative adaptation for use by male pirates. However, many elements of women's fashion were actually quite practical for pirate life. Wide skirts might be cut down to make multiple pairs of loose trousers, while bodices could be modified into vests or protective gear. The psychological impact of wearing captured finery was significant. A pirate wearing a captured officer's coat or a nobleman's hat was making a statement about his defiance of authority and his success as a criminal. This psychological warfare was often as important as the practical benefits of good clothing. However, there were limits to how much finery pirates could practically use. Overly elaborate clothing could interfere with work, make the wearer a target for enemies or jealous crewmates, and was difficult to maintain in the shipboard environment. Successful pirates learned to strike a balance between projecting success and maintaining practicality. The modification of captured clothing became an art form among many pirate crews. Ship's tailors or crew members with sewing skills became valuable for their ability to transform impractical luxury items into useful garments. A merchant's elaborate coat might be stripped of its decorations, shortened for practicality, and reinforced for durability, creating a garment that combined luxury materials with pirate functionality. Gender and pirate fashion. While the vast majority of pirates were male, the few women who joined pirate crews faced unique challenges. When it came to clothing and personal presentation, their stories illuminate different aspects of pirate fashion and reveal how clothing choices could be matters of survival, identity, and strategy. The most famous female pirates, such as Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read, were known to dress as men, at least initially. This wasn't unusual for women seeking to join ships' crews, as the maritime world was exclusively male and women were often prohibited from sailing except as passengers. Dressing as men allowed these women to blend in and perform the same duties as their male counterparts. However, cross-dressing presented its own challenges. Women's bodies required different clothing solutions, particularly for binding breasts and creating a convincing male silhouette. Historical accounts suggest that female pirates used tight bandages or specially constructed undergarments to achieve the necessary appearance. These solutions were often uncomfortable and could be dangerous during physical activity, but they were necessary for maintaining their disguise. The clothing choices of known female pirates reflected the same practical considerations as their male counterparts, but with additional complexities. They needed garments that would conceal their gender, while still allowing for the full range of shipboard activities. This often meant wearing slightly larger clothes than their male counterparts, choosing fabrics that draped in ways that disguised body shape, and being extra careful about garment maintenance to avoid situations where damaged clothing might reveal their identity. Once their gender became known to the crew, female pirates had more flexibility in their clothing choices, but they still faced unique challenges. They needed to maintain respect and authority in a male-dominated environment, which often meant continuing to dress in a way that emphasized their competence and toughness rather than their femininity. The few accounts we have of female pirates suggest that they often adopted a hybrid style once their identity was revealed, maintaining the practical aspects of male pirate clothing while incorporating subtle feminine elements. This might include wearing their hair in styles that were distinctly female, but still practical for shipboard life, or choosing accessories that were feminine without being impractical. Pregnancy presented extreme challenges for female pirates. The few documented cases suggest that pregnant female pirates continued to work and fight almost until birth, which required clothing adaptations that are barely hinted at in historical sources. The practical solutions they developed speak to remarkable ingenuity and determination. The psychological aspects of clothing choice were particularly complex for female pirates. Their clothing needed to send multiple messages simultaneously: that they were competent sailors, dangerous fighters, and legitimate members of the crew. This balancing act required careful consideration of every garment choice. Tools as accessories in pirate society The distinction between tools and accessories was often meaningless. The items a pirate carried weren't just functional, they were expressions of his skills, experiences, and status within the crew. Understanding these tool accessories provides insight into the practical realities of pirate life and the ingenious ways pirates adapted to their unique circumstances. Every pirate carried a marlinspike, a pointed metal tool used for separating rope strands and working with knots. This simple tool was essential for shipboard life, but the way it was carried and maintained said much about its owner. Experienced sailors often had marlinspikes with custom handles, carved decorations, or special features that reflected their particular skills or preferences. Navigation tools, when carried by individual pirates, were both practical instruments and status symbols. A compass, sextant, or chart could mean the difference between life and death for a crew. So pirates who owned such items held positions of significant importance. These tools were often carried in specially made cases or pouches that protected them from the elements while keeping them easily accessible. Carpentry tools were essential on any ship, and pirates who possessed these skills often carried their own personal tool sets. Chisels, saws, hammers, and measuring devices were typically hung from belts or carried in specialized tool rolls. The quality and maintenance of these tools often reflected the skill and status of their owner within the crew. Medical instruments, carried by ships, surgeons, or pirates with medical knowledge, represented some of the most valuable and carefully maintained items on pirate ships. Surgical knives, bone saws, forceps, and other medical tools were typically kept in special cases and were considered communal property due to their importance for crew survival. Gambling equipment was also commonly carried as personal accessories. Dice, cards, and gaming tokens were important for shipboard entertainment, and could also be valuable for trade in port. Many pirates carried these items in specially made pouches or cases, often decorated or personalized to reflect their owner's personality. Musical instruments served dual purposes as entertainment and signaling devices. Fiddles, flutes, drums, and other portable instruments were common on pirate ships. While primarily used for entertainment during long voyages, they could also serve as communication tools during raids or battles. Writing materials, while not common among ordinary pirates, were essential for captains and quartermasters. Ink, quills, and paper were valuable commodities that needed protection from the elements. These were typically carried in waterproof cases or specially designed pouches that kept them dry and accessible. Measuring and weighing tools were crucial for evaluating loot and conducting trade. Small scales, measures, and testing equipment for precious metals were often carried by pirates responsible for assessing the value of captured goods. These tools were typically compact and designed for portability while maintaining accuracy. Maintenance and repair in pirate society. The maintenance of clothing and accessories was a constant preoccupation in pirate society. Not just because of the harsh maritime environment, but because replacement was often impossible. Pirates developed sophisticated systems for maintaining, repairing, and extending the life of their possessions that reveal remarkable ingenuity and cooperation. Sewing and repair skills were essential for survival, and many pirates became accomplished tailors out of necessity. Ships often carried basic sewing supplies, needles, thread, patches, and simple tools that were available to all crew members. However, the quality and availability of these supplies varied greatly, depending on the crew's recent successes and their relationships with suppliers in various ports. The techniques pirates used for clothing repair were often more ingenious than those used on land. With limited materials available, they had to be creative about reinforcement and patching. Sailcloth was commonly used for patches because it was strong, readily available, and already adapted to maritime conditions. Rope could be unraveled to provide thread, while leather from various sources could be used for reinforcement. Communal repair sessions were common aboard pirate ships during calm weather or long voyages. These sessions served social functions as well as practical ones, providing opportunities for crew members to share skills, tell stories, and bond over shared tasks. Experienced sailors often taught younger crew members essential repair techniques, passing down knowledge that could save lives. The preservation of clothing required constant vigilance against the enemies of fabric: salt, moisture, mold, and insects. Pirates developed various techniques for protecting their clothing, including regular airing, treatment with oils or tar, and careful storage during extreme weather. The most valuable garments might be kept in waterproof containers or wrapped in oiled cloth. Preventive maintenance was crucial for extending clothing life. Pirates learned to inspect their garments regularly for signs of wear, addressing small problems before they became major failures. A small tear that was promptly patched might extend a garment's life by months, while neglect could lead to total failure at the worst possible moment. Innovation in repair techniques was driven by necessity and limited resources. Pirates developed ways to strengthen weak fabric using available materials, create waterproof patches using tar and canvas, and even redesign garments to work around damaged areas. These innovations often spread throughout the pirate community as crews shared information and techniques, where their adaptation strategies, the unpredictable and often extreme weather conditions faced by pirates required sophisticated clothing strategies that went far beyond simple seasonal changes. Pirates needed to be prepared for tropical storms, freezing gales, scorching sun, and everything in between, often with limited warning and no opportunity to seek shelter. Storm preparation was a crucial aspect of pirate clothing strategy. When heavy weather threatened, pirates needed clothing that would protect them while allowing for the intense physical activity required to manage a ship in a storm. This meant garments that shed water rather than absorbing it, provided warmth when wet, and wouldn't become dangerously heavy or restrictive. Oiled canvas garments were essential stormwear for many pirates. These were typically simple coats or cloaks treated with tar, oil, or other waterproofing agents. While not completely waterproof, they provided significant protection from rain and spray, while remaining flexible enough for active work. The downside was that these treatments made the garments heavy, smelly, and sometimes uncomfortable against the skin. Hot weather clothing strategies were equally important for pirates operating in tropical regions. The key was maximizing air circulation while providing protection from sun and insects. Light-colored, loose-fitting garments were preferred when available, though the practical limitations of pirate life often meant making do with whatever was at hand. The layering system used by many pirates was remarkably sophisticated. A pirate might wear a thin shirt as a base layer, add a vest for warmth and tool-carrying capacity, and top it with a coat that could be removed as conditions changed. This system allowed for quick adaptation to changing conditions without requiring complete wardrobe changes. Night clothing presented special challenges. Temperatures could drop significantly at night, even in tropical regions, and pirates often needed to maintain watches or respond to emergencies. Many pirates developed the habit of sleeping in their clothes, ready to respond to threats at a moment's notice. This required clothing that was comfortable enough for sleep, but durable enough for immediate action. Seasonal transitions were particularly challenging for pirates who operated across multiple climate zones. A crew might begin a voyage in the frigid North Atlantic and end it in the tropical Caribbean, requiring clothing that could adapt to completely different conditions. This led to complex packing and storage strategies that maximized versatility while minimizing bulk. The psychology of pirate appearance. The psychological aspects of pirate fashion were perhaps as important as the practical considerations. Pirates understood that their appearance was a weapon in itself, capable of intimidating enemies, attracting recruits, and projecting the image necessary for success in their chosen profession. The deliberate cultivation of a fearsome appearance was a survival strategy for many pirates. A reputation for ruthlessness and unpredictability could often accomplish what violence could not, allowing pirates to capture ships and settlements without protracted battles that might result in casualties or damage to valuable loot. Scarification and tattoos, while not clothing per se, were important aspects of pirate appearance that interacted with their clothing choices. Many pirates bore scars from battles, accidents, or deliberate self-modification that they displayed as badges of honor. Clothing choices often emphasized, rather than concealed, these marks, using them as part of an intimidating overall appearance. The maintenance of weapons and accessories served psychological as well as practical purposes. A pirate with well-maintained weapons and clean accessories projected competence and success, while one with rusty weapons and tattered clothing might be seen as unsuccessful or unreliable. This perception could affect everything from recruitment opportunities to the respect of fellow pirates. Personal grooming, despite the limitations of shipboard life, was often carefully maintained for psychological effect. Many pirates took pride in their beards, hair, or other aspects of their appearance that they could control. These elements of personal style helped maintain individual identity in the conformist environment of a ship's crew. Regional specializations and adaptations. The global nature of piracy during its Golden Age created fascinating regional specializations in clothing and accessories that reflected local conditions, available materials, and cultural influences. Each major pirate region developed distinctive characteristics that set its practitioners apart from their counterparts elsewhere. Caribbean pirates developed perhaps the most recognizable style, though it was far different from Hollywood depictions. The constant heat and humidity of the tropical Caribbean required clothing that could handle extreme moisture, while providing protection from intense sun. Light-colored cotton and linen were preferred when available, though the reality was that most pirates wore whatever they could acquire. The availability of captured Spanish and Portuguese goods in the Caribbean created opportunities for incorporating luxury items into practical wardrobes. Spanish leather goods, in particular, were highly prized for their quality and durability. Portuguese textiles and accessories also found their way into pirate wardrobes, though usually after modification for practical use. Madagascar pirates, operating from the island that became a pirate haven in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, developed clothing strategies adapted to both maritime and terrestrial environments. They needed clothing suitable for shipboard life, but also for extended periods on land, including ventures into the island's interior for provisioning and refuge. The influence of local Malagasy clothing traditions can be seen in the clothing choices of Madagascar-based pirates. Local weaving techniques, fabric choices, and garment styles were often adopted and adapted by European pirates, who spent extended periods on the island. This cultural exchange created unique hybrid styles that combined European maritime traditions with African and Malagasy innovations. North African corsairs brought different traditions to pirate fashion, reflecting Islamic cultural influences and adaptation to Mediterranean conditions. Their clothing often featured elements like turbans, flowing robes, and distinctive footwear that were well suited to both shipboard life and operations in desert coastal regions. Asian pirates, particularly those operating in the South China Sea and Indian Ocean, developed clothing styles that reflected centuries of maritime tradition in monsoon conditions. Their garments were often designed with sophisticated understanding of moisture management, using construction techniques and materials that had been developed specifically for tropical maritime use. The myth-making of Hollywood. The transformation of pirate fashion from practical maritime clothing to romantic costume began almost immediately after the end of the Golden Age of Piracy and reached its peak with the development of Hollywood cinema. Understanding how and why this transformation occurred reveals as much about our cultural fantasies as it does about historical reality. The romanticization of pirate appearance began with early 18th and 19th century literature. Authors like Daniel Defoe and Robert Louis Stevenson, writing for audiences who had never seen real pirates, emphasized the exotic and dramatic aspects of pirate life while downplaying the harsh realities. This literary tradition established many of the visual tropes that would later be adopted by Hollywood. Early film depictions of pirates were influenced more by stage traditions than historical research. Theater costumes needed to be visible from a distance and instantly recognizable to audiences, leading to exaggerated and impractical designs that emphasized visual drama over authenticity. These theatrical traditions carried over into early cinema and established visual conventions that persist today. The economics of film production also shaped pirate fashion depictions. Elaborate costumes were more expensive than simple ones, but they also provided better visual value for audiences. Studios invested in creating distinctive, memorable pirate looks that would distinguish their films from competitors, leading to increasingly elaborate and historically inaccurate costumes. Color film technology further distorted pirate fashion representations. The muted, practical colors of real pirate clothing did untranslate well to the vibrant color palettes that studios wanted to showcase. This led to the adoption of brighter, more saturated colors that looked good on screen but bore little resemblance to historical reality. The influence of contemporary fashion trends on pirate costume design is often overlooked. Pirates in 1950s films often reflected 1950s fashion sensibilities. While modern pirate films incorporate contemporary design elements, this means that movie pirates often tell us more about when the film was made than about historical piracy. The truth about pirate hygiene and clothing maintenance. One of the most persistent myths about pirates is that they were universally filthy and unconcerned with personal hygiene. While it's true that maintaining cleanliness was challenging in the maritime environment, many pirates were actually quite concerned with their appearance and developed sophisticated strategies for staying as clean as possible under difficult circumstances. The availability of fresh water was the primary limiting factor in pirate hygiene. Fresh water was precious aboard ship, needed for drinking and cooking, so it was rarely available for washing clothes or bathing. This constraint forced pirates to develop alternative cleaning methods that relied on seawater, available chemicals, and ingenious techniques. Seawater washing was the most common method for cleaning clothes, though it came with significant drawbacks. Salt water didn't remove oils and certain types of dirt as effectively as fresh water, and the salt residue left behind could be harsh on both fabric and skin. However, seawater was unlimited and could remove some types of stains and odors, making it better than no washing at all. Pirates developed techniques for maximizing the effectiveness of seawater washing. They learned to time washing sessions to take advantage of rough seas that provided natural agitation. Use available soap substitutes like plant-based cleaners found on tropical islands. And follow seawater washing with freshwater rinses when possible. Sand and scrubbing were often used as mechanical cleaning methods. Pirates would rub sand into heavily soiled areas of clothing to abrade away dirt and stains, then rinse with seawater. This technique was hard on fabric, but could remove stubborn stains that defied other cleaning methods. Beach sand was preferred when available because it was cleaner and finer than the sand found in some ship-s stores. The drying of clothes was another major challenge in the humid, salt-laden air of the maritime environment. Pirates learned to take advantage of any dry, windy weather to air out their clothing. They developed techniques for quick drying, including wringing out excess water, spreading clothes in the sun, and using the ship's rigging as improvised clotheslines. Personal grooming standards varied widely among pirates, but they were often higher than popular culture suggests. Many pirate captains were noted for their attention to personal appearance, understanding that a well-groomed leader inspired more confidence in his crew and more fear in his enemies. The famous pirate Bartholomew Roberts was known for his fastidious attention to his appearance, changing his clothes regularly and maintaining high grooming standards even under difficult conditions. Barber services were available on many pirate ships, provided either by crew members with the necessary skills or by specialists who were recruited specifically for this purpose. A ship's barber might also serve as a surgeon, dentist, or general medical practitioner, making these individuals extremely valuable to the crew. Hair management was a constant concern for pirates. Long hair was traditional among sailors, but could be dangerous if it interfered with work or combat. Pirates developed various strategies for managing their hair, from simple ponytails to elaborate braiding systems that kept hair secure while maintaining traditional sailor appearance. Beard grooming was often a point of personal pride among pirates, while some preferred to be clean-shaven for practical reasons. Many maintained carefully groomed beards that became part of their personal identity. The famous Blackbeard was known for weaving hemp and ribbons into his beard and lighting slow matches in it before battle to create a terrifying smoke-wreathed appearance. The treatment of clothing infestations was an ongoing battle for pirates. Lice, fleas, and other parasites were constant problems in the close quarters of ship life. Pirates developed various techniques for dealing with these pests, including regular inspection and cleaning of clothing, the use of natural repellents when available, and sometimes the drastic measure of abandoning infested clothing entirely. Seasonal and climate adaptations. Pirates operating across different climate zones and seasons developed sophisticated strategies for adapting their clothing to varying conditions. These adaptations reveal the remarkable flexibility and ingenuity that characterized successful pirate operations, as well as the intimate knowledge of weather patterns and environmental challenges that was essential for maritime survival. Tropical operations required completely different clothing strategies than those used in temperate or cold regions. In the blazing heat of the Caribbean or African coast, the challenge was staying cool while protecting skin from sun damage and maintaining the ability to work effectively. Light colors were preferred when available, though they were often impractical due to their tendency to show dirt and their higher cost. The phenomenon of tropical storms and hurricanes created unique challenges for pirates operating in these regions. Sudden, violent weather changes meant that pirates needed clothing that could transition quickly from hot weather gear to storm protection. This led to the development of layering systems that could be rapidly adjusted as conditions changed. Monsoon season operations in the Indian Ocean required specialized clothing strategies. The extreme humidity and constant rain of monsoon season could rot clothing in days if proper precautions were untaken. Pirates operating in these conditions developed techniques for protecting their clothing during the worst weather and quickly drying it during brief dry periods. Cold weather operations presented the opposite challenge, staying warm while maintaining mobility and functionality. Northern pirates developed layering systems that could provide warmth without bulk, using multiple thin layers rather than single heavy garments. This approach allowed for better temperature regulation and easier movement. The problem of clothing storage during seasonal transitions was significant for pirates, who operated across multiple climate zones. Limited storage space meant that pirates couldn't maintain separate wardrobes for different conditions, so they needed clothing that could adapt to various climates or could be easily modified as needed. Seasonal activities also influenced clothing choices. Careening, the process of beaching a ship to clean and repair its hull, required clothing that could handle work in sand, salt water, and tropical sun. Raiding operations might require different clothing than normal sailing, depending on the target and conditions. Cultural exchange and innovation. The international nature of pirate crews created unique opportunities for cultural exchange that profoundly influenced pirate fashion. A single ship might have crew members from a dozen different countries and cultural backgrounds, each bringing their own clothing traditions, practical knowledge, and aesthetic preferences. This cultural mixing created innovation in clothing, design, and construction techniques. A pirate crew might combine English tailoring techniques with Spanish leatherworking, African textile traditions, and Native American waterproofing methods to create garments that were superior to any single cultural tradition. The adoption of indigenous clothing techniques was common among pirates operating in regions with strong native traditions. Native American moccasins, for example, were often adopted by pirates operating along the North American coast, because they were better suited to certain types of terrain and activity than European footwear. African textile traditions had significant influence on pirate fashion, particularly in the Caribbean, where many crew members were escaped slaves or free Africans. African techniques for creating durable, weather-resistant clothing were often superior to European methods for tropical conditions. The incorporation of Asian design elements was common among pirates who operated in the Indian Ocean or South China Sea. Asian clothing construction techniques, particularly in the areas of moisture management and climate adaptation, were often adopted and adapted by European pirates. The reality of pirate wealth and display. The relationship between pirate success and clothing display was complex and often counterintuitive. While successful pirates certainly had access to better clothing and accessories, the display of wealth through clothing was balanced against practical considerations and social dynamics within pirate society. Successful pirate captains walked a fine line between displaying enough wealth to maintain authority and respect while not appearing so wealthy as to encourage mutiny or attack from rivals. The clothing choices of famous pirates like Blackbeard, Captain Kidd, and Bartholomew Roberts reflected this balance, incorporating luxury elements in ways that enhanced rather than hindered their effectiveness as leaders and fighters. The democratization of captured goods meant that even ordinary crew members often had access to luxury items that would have been impossible for them to afford in legitimate society. However, the communal nature of many pirate operations meant that individual accumulation of wealth was often limited by crew agreements and social pressure. Investment in clothing was often one of the first things pirates did with their share of loot. Good clothing was both immediately useful and a form of insurance. It could be traded or sold if necessary, provided practical benefits in the meantime, and helped project the image necessary for continued success in pirate society. Pirates in port, dressing for shore leave. When pirates went ashore, their clothing choices faced entirely different pressures and requirements. Port towns presented opportunities for social interaction, commerce, and recreation that required different clothing strategies than shipboard life. Understanding how pirates dressed for shore leave reveals another dimension of their complex relationship with clothing and identity. Port clothing needed to serve multiple functions. It had to identify the wearer as a successful pirate, to impress potential recruits and intimidate potential enemies, while also allowing for integration into port society for commerce and entertainment. This required a careful balance between the intimidating appearance that served pirates well in their professional activities and a social acceptability necessary for conducting business ashore. Many pirates maintained special clothing for shore leave, carefully preserved aboard ship and only worn when going ashore. These shore clothes were often the finest garments a pirate owned, incorporating captured luxury items and personal accessories that projected wealth and success. However, even shore clothes needed to be practical enough for the physical demands of port life and potential emergency departure. The social dynamics of port towns influenced pirate clothing choices in complex ways. In some ports, pirates were welcomed and catered to, allowing them to dress as elaborately as they wished. In others, they needed to blend in with the general population to avoid unwanted attention from authorities. This required flexibility in clothing choices and the ability to quickly modify appearance as needed. Gambling and entertainment venues in port towns were important social spaces for pirates, and clothing choices in these venues served specific functions. Pirates needed to project success to be taken seriously in high-stakes games, while also being prepared for the possibility that entertainment might turn violent. This led to clothing choices that balanced elegance with practicality. The evolution of pirate fashion over time. Pirate fashion wasn't static but evolved throughout the Golden Age of Piracy in response to changing technology, available materials, economic conditions, and social pressures. Understanding this evolution provides insight into how practical fashion develops under extreme constraints. Early pirates of the 17th century dressed much like ordinary sailors, with little to distinguish them from legitimate maritime workers. As piracy became more organized and profitable, distinctive elements began to emerge that marked the transition from desperate sailors to professional criminals with their own cultural identity. The peak period of Caribbean piracy in the early 18th century saw the development of what we might call classic pirate fashion. The combination of practical maritime clothing with captured luxury items and personal modifications that created a distinctive look. This period produced the most famous pirates and established many of the visual conventions that persist today. The decline of piracy in the mid-18th century was reflected in changing fashion choices. As piracy became less profitable and more dangerous, pirates often attempted to blend in with legitimate society, adopting more conventional clothing choices that would help them avoid detection and persecution. Conclusion. The real legacy of pirate fashion, as we reach the end of our journey through the real world of pirate fashion, it becomes clear that the truth is far more fascinating than any Hollywood fiction. Real pirate clothing tells a story of survival, ingenuity, cultural exchange, and the remarkable human ability to create identity and community under the most challenging circumstances. The practical clothing choices made by pirates weren't just about staying alive. They were about creating a new way of life outside the constraints of conventional society. In their patched canvas jackets, their salt-stained bandanas, and their carefully maintained weapons, pirates created a visual language that spoke of freedom, danger, and the rejection of authority. The influence of real pirate fashion extends far beyond the Golden Age of Piracy itself. Elements of pirate clothing, the bandana, the loose-fitting shirt, the practical belt system, became standard features of maritime clothing that persist today. Modern sailing gear, work clothing, and even fashion design continue to draw inspiration from the practical innovations developed by pirates centuries ago. Perhaps most importantly, the story of pirate fashion reminds us that clothing is never just about appearance. It's about adaptation, survival, identity, and the constant human struggle to maintain dignity and personality under the most challenging circumstances. The next time you see a pirate movie, remember that behind the Hollywood glamour lies a far more interesting story of human ingenuity and the remarkable ways that people adapt to extraordinary circumstances. The real pirates weren't the swashbuckling heroes of popular imagination, but they were something perhaps more impressive. Ordinary people who created extraordinary solutions to the challenges of life outside society's protection. Their clothing choices, born of necessity and shaped by circumstance, tell a story of resilience, creativity, and the enduring human spirit that no costume designer could ever improve upon. So, the next time you see Captain Jack Sparrow in his elaborate costume, remember the real pirates, the ones who wore patched canvas and salt-stained cotton, who turned sailcloth into clothing and rope into accessories, who created a distinctive style not from vanity but from the pressing demands of survival at sea. Their legacy isn't in the movies we watch, but in the ongoing human tradition of making the best of difficult circumstances and finding ways to express identity and community, even in the harshest environments. That's the real story of pirate fashion. Not a tale of romantic adventure, but a masterclass in practical clothing design, cultural adaptation, and a remarkable human ability to thrive under extraordinary pressure. The truth, as always, is far more interesting than fiction.